Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back to the HazMat Podcast, episode number 4. Great to be here with you. And today we're going to have a look at probably the biggest question that precedes really everything else in this podcast right now. What is asbestos? And a little story. I worked briefly in real estate in the Wairarapa in New Zealand for a few months, and I was actually asked by a home buyer about the cladding on a property, and they asked me, do you think this has got asbestos in it? And at that point, this is only a few years ago, I didn't even know what it was. So no judgment here. This is for people that don't know what asbestos is, and we're going to go through basically what it is, why you find it everywhere, even still now, and maybe even some of the typical places you're going to find it. I think it's important to touch on why it's dangerous as well. So we're not going to get too technical or too scientific. I don't think it's all that relevant at this point. It's more just a basic awareness what it is, and you don't have to be embarrassed if you don't know. Okay, so asbestos is a mineral. It comes out of the ground. And it is mined. It's mined out of the ground, and it was mined for commercial purposes a long time ago. There are parts of the world where it is still mined today, but it is obviously on the decrease, which is great. Just like any other mineral or metal, it comes out of the ground in the form of mining in most cases. And once asbestos is mined, it's then manufactured, and it can be drawn out because it's quite a fibrous mineral, meaning that it breaks down into a lot of small fibers, and it can be used in a lot of different applications. So asbestos comes out of the ground. It doesn't grow on trees. It doesn't come from plants. It doesn't fall out of the sky. It's just a rock, essentially, that comes out of the ground that is fibrous, and it has a few quite good characteristics about it, which we'll go into now. In the main part, asbestos has, I think, six different types or subtypes, and primarily the most common use is chrysotile, which is what they call white asbestos. There's also brown, which is amosite, and blue, which is chrysotolite, and then there's 3 others that aren't used as much. But the main thing is, the easiest way I was taught to keep them in mind was white, brown, and blue. White appears to be a little less of a problem than brown or blue. They seem to be a little bit nastier. But by and large, in our industry, especially in New Zealand, they're all treated pretty much the same. If it's an asbestos-containing material, all the same safety features will apply, really, regardless, in most cases, of what type. So why the hell would we use asbestos, mine it, if it's dangerous? And it's a little bit controversial. In general, people didn't know over the last 100 years or so, weren't quite aware of the health impacts of asbestos, and they looked at the good points about it, and we'll go over those shortly. But the main explanation why do we use it when we know that it's dangerous is that in general it wasn't really well known that it was dangerous. There are historical reported cases of asbestos causing disease and fatalities, but overall, whether we didn't know or didn't want to know, that seems to be the reason why it was used a lot back in the earlier days. We'll talk about a couple of the key characteristics or features why asbestos was popular. And as I mentioned, we haven't gone into why it's dangerous yet, but if you take that away, the actual positives for it are pretty good. It gives a lot of tensile strength, meaning if you mix it into another product, it'll make it stronger. There's great insulation qualities for it, so both acoustic and heat, thermal insulation. Also electrical insulation, so it's great for using in switchboards and things like that because it doesn't conduct electricity. Quick story, I had a former career as a law enforcement officer, and during firearms training, I could see in the building a lot of funny looking tiles all over the place and on the walls and on the ceiling. And I came to learn later that those were asbestos tiles, very common for the time that firearms range was built. But this goes back to the insulation qualities. It would absorb the sound, which is great for that application. So, yeah, taking asbestos, relatively cheap back then. It was mined in obviously big quantities, or not that hard to get. And mix it in with other building materials in particular, and it will improve them a lot in some cases. So, financially, a good decision to use asbestos. It doesn't appear to rot either. So it's very popular, or was very popular, as a cladding material versus timber, which has a shelf life, obviously, and will rot. So, yeah, a lot of good things about it. Now we'll just go into some of the nasty things about it. Asbestos can cause cancer. That's the bottom line. Now, how it works is asbestos, if it gets into your lungs in any significant quantity, it doesn't go anywhere. It's such a hardy mineral that it appears to be our bodies, or most of us, can't break it down, and it will sit in our lung tissue, gets embedded in your lung tissue, and then it may cause cancer as a result. The statistics on asbestos causing death are out there, but they are a little skew with. And what I mean by that is, if a death is counted purely as caused by asbestos versus a death that happens in old age for another related issue, asbestos may be to blame or partially to blame, but I don't necessarily think that means it's counted as an asbestos fatality. So there are figures out there, probably worse than actually what is published. So we won't go into specifics on that. You can look at WorkSafe website in New Zealand, and they will give you some statistics. But as I say, it's probably worse than what we know. And yeah, when you disturb asbestos, the little fibers get airborne. They become respirable, meaning you breathe them in unwillingly, obviously, and they stick in your lung tissue. And they're so small and sharp that they will get deep into the tissue and they will sit there. We may have in the future a health expert come on, maybe a doctor or something, and can give us a bit more of a medical explanation for asbestosis, which is the disease that it can cause, or mesothelioma. But at the moment, all you need to know, because you didn't even know what asbestos was, is that it is nasty, it can cause cancer, and it's done by breathing it in. Now, the rule of thumb in our industry is, because asbestos is very prevalent, it's in a lot of buildings, it's in a lot of homes, it's all over the place. The advice is to not disturb it. And that is correct. I mean, the last thing you want to do with asbestos is disturb it and get those fibers airborne to be breathed in. So you're right, as asbestos is left to its own, usually it won't harm anybody because it's not becoming airborne. So that's really important. Don't panic if you have it in your home, or your parents do, or your friend does, or your workplace does. Asbestos is very common. We're working on it, getting rid of it, but it's still very common. So what you want to do is not disturb it as much as possible, and then over time, as buildings get upgraded or demolished, we'll slowly get on top of it and get it out, especially in New Zealand and the more of the Western type countries. I think just to reassure everybody a little bit that it is everywhere, and you and I, we all breathe asbestos in from time to time. It's unavoidable. Asbestos fibers are traceable in the atmosphere, and walking down the street, you're bound to breathe in some asbestos now and again just because it's so prevalent. So please keep that in mind. Don't think if you're going to breathe in one fiber that's going to be the end for you. It's certainly not in our experience. Even the data that's available now doesn't seem to correlate that you've breathed in asbestos a bit, and it's a fatal flaw. So just keep a balanced perspective. We all breathe it in. We try not to disturb it. We try to deal with it as minimally as we can. But it is a problem and it can be dangerous. So we have to treat it with respect. And that is why we get companies like HazMat and professionals to remove asbestos as often as we can. So mentioning that, I think going on from here, we'll talk at a later date about some of the places in your home where you're likely to find asbestos. I think people want to know that. And a lot of people are still surprised to this day when they're told their roof may be asbestos, or their cladding, or their vinyl floor in their home. So we'll go into that, I think, in more detail. And as I say too, with the health implications, I think we should get a doctor in. We'll find a doctor that deals with some of the asbestos-related illnesses, and maybe they can explain, especially out of interest for you guys, what that looks like and what it's like to deal with. So thank you very much. Today was just a very brief look at what is asbestos. We've covered what it is. We've covered where it comes from. We've covered why it was deemed to be a good product. We've covered why it's not, why it's quite dangerous, actually. And we've also covered a little bit of why did we keep using it when we didn't know that it was dangerous. So that'll do for episode 4. Thank you for joining in, and looking forward to catching up with you next week with a new episode. That's the HazMat Podcast. Thank you. Bye.